Draken then sat there remembering the day that went very well. Him getting sick, telling Abby and Greg about the evil whippings that occurred at school, and the nightmare. Oh God, the nightmare. Sitting and keeping his head in his hands, he felt warm and protected by the red blood-like shining orange fire that was dancing in the air in front of him. Shigo had stepped out of her shower and dried herself off. Then she put around her body a nice white towel that had a little black flower on it. Wiping off the mirror, she saw her reflection, looking and studying her face. She saw the Shigo that she didn't know. What has happened to me? Shigo thought, as she looked deep down in her own tired eyes, remembering the days when she and her brothers were fighting crimes and how they would stop evil, and then remembering the day she met Draken. Shigo had thanked him while never telling him. She thanked him because of him, and she wouldn't have been evil and fighting Kim Possible when they needed to. Also because of him, they would have never fallen in love, and because of him, she would never be having his baby. Why do I feel like it's a crime to be nice? Shigo then whispered to herself as the glass mirror started to fog up again. Shaking her head and coming back to the real world, Shigo then walked into their bedroom and got changed into a nice long black nightgown. Where did he go? Shigo asked as she looked around the house, then looked into the living room and saw Draken sitting by the fire thinking. Are you okay? Shigo asked, coming over and sitting next to him. When Draken heard Shigo's voice, he literally jumped out in the air and the skin went from blue to moon white. Shigo, you scared me, he said, coming back to his normal breathing. Why are you down here all alone? Shigo asked, tilting her head and admiring him. I don't know. I heard the water running in the shower and I thought you must be tired, and I didn't even know if you were going to bed. So I decided to come back down to the fire and relax, Draken said, looking back into the dancing fire that was a breath of evil. Are you okay? I know you're still shocked about seeing your mom and all. It's just Draken. I have never seen you this way before. You thinking of something, aren't you? Is it the past? Shigo asked, holding his hand. Draken's eyes then shot open wider than usual. How do you even know I'm thinking about my past? He asked her. I don't know, Shigo said, slightly laughing and pulling some black hair behind her right ear. It's just a feeling, I guess. Shigo then responded by shrugging her off her shoulders. You're psychic, Draken said, teasing her. Shigo then took a look at Draken's face in her hands and started to kiss him. The night was so perfect. Everything was wonderful. Telling Miss Lipsky about the baby, and with her being happy, Draken just like being back to his normal self. And I never want this night to be over, Shigo thought, as Draken started to lie down on his back and Shigo pinned him to the ground but still kissing him. Then Draken wrapped his arms around Shigo's thin waist and then pulled her body closer to his. The fire cracked harder and long as they kissed. Finally, they were both out of breath. Shigo was tired but wanted to stay with him as the fire, so she just rested her hand on his chest while lying down and watching the fire. What happened after your mom died? Draken said in his normal scratchy voice as he gazed into the fire while running his finger through Shigo's wet hair. Shigo sighed. After burying her and missing her, which me and my brothers will never stop doing, we went to a graveyard on Halloween. I rode along with Migo and he rode along running bike. He loved it so much. He would call it Roadrunner, Shigo said while laughing a bit. And of course Higo, because he was the strongest, put the twins into a baby seat and drove him down on his bike. I know you might think I'm crazy, Draken, for remembering this stuff so well. It's just I'll never forget those days, Shigo said, looking up into his eyes. It's okay, I don't blame you, he said honestly, as Shigo laid her hand back down on his chest and went to carry back on her story. Migo decided to bring a shovel. It was better that way, but Higo said we should dig him up with our hands, and the shovel would be one less thing to carry, but none of us liked the idea. I was the only one who found his tombstone. My dad's, I mean. I still remember like it was the afternoon. I was alone while the others were looking for it, but I could sense that it would be. Coming up to the shimmering gravestone, It had his name and date written on it, telling Higo and Migo and the others that were looking for it. Whatever it was, I held the babies and sang to them, as the two dug up my dad. Then Shigo's voice was interrupted by Draken's. Why did you dig up your father? He asked, raising one eyebrow in total confusion. Because, she was annoyed. We wanted my mom and dad's bodies to be together in peace, Shigo said softly. Then Shigo said as getting back to her story. Well, let's just say it had to be one of the hardest days of my entire life. I loved my dad, and I could possibly say. He told me everything about life and was always there for me. Bringing his body back home with us and was extremely hard because we were all on bikes and none of us had the power to fly. So we buried him next to my mother in the morning. I know where they were buried, and it's weird. My dad said if there was ever someone that asked for the diamond of xXxKimPossiblexXx, his body would hold the answer, Shigo said, finishing her sad little tale. Wow, Shigo, I'm so sorry, Draken said, holding her close as their bodies pressed together in passion. It's okay, it's the past. I guess I have to stop living it, Shigo said, laughing a bit while sitting on him. Looking up at Shigo, they both seemed tired. Well, I'm off going to bed. Care to join me? Shigo asked, laughing and pulling him off the ground. Sure, Draken said, holding her hand, and with that they were both very tired, and when they went upstairs they fell asleep. The fire had died down in the middle of the night, and what Draken had on his mind was so hard. It's hard for Shigo to stop living the past, but I guess it'll be even harder for me. Draken thought as he held Shigo in his arms in the dark. I wonder what she'll be dreaming about, he thought, and with that, he began to feel off into a deep sleep. But luckily for him, the night would be fine, but for Shigo, her night wasn't going to be pleasant at all. Shigo! Shigo! A voice came in Draken and Shigo's lair. Suddenly, Shigo flew up on her bed in cold sweat, looking around as she was breathing heavily. Draken apparently was gone from the bed too. Looking around, she noticed that she may have been dreaming and heard a voice in her mind. Lying back down, she let out a deep breath and wondered where Draken was. Turning onto her side and shut her eyes, and then heard that voice again. Shigo! The voice seemed dark and lonely, but so familiar. Getting up and out of bed in a huge gust of wind blew her to her bedroom and making her drapes fly all around. Just great, Shigo said to herself, stumbling over to the window and shutting it with all of her might. Shigo, help me, the voice said in a sad tone. Cautiously, Shigo's body started to walk, and she didn't want to move. What was going on? She yelled, as her feet were walking towards the door. Help me, the voice cried, as it started to fade away. Okay, I'll help you, Shigo then said, and she walked slowly out of her bedroom door. The air was ice cold. When she breathed from her mouth, she could see the white clouds of smoke, rubbing her arms as trying to stay warm. She walked down the dark hallway, trying to find the voice. What do you want? She said, raising her voice a bit. He's coming. Who is coming? Shigo said, as her hands started to glow as she walked down the stairs to get to the first floor. Looking around, she felt dumb. Then she felt sick and turned around, almost screamed when she saw something she never thought she would see. Sitting in front of the fire that was burning again, sat a girl. She was holding her knees in her arms and seemed to be crying. Her hair was the color of the moon, with a dab of golden blonde to it. Shigo couldn't see her face, even though she was behind her, but also this girl's hair was covering her entire face. Who are you? Oh my god! Shigo almost screamed as she clamped her hand over her mouth and jumped back in disgust and horror. The pale girl who was crying was sitting in the pool of crimson blood. One arm was at her side, was very limp, and the girl had a scalpel in her hand. Gulping hard, Shigo took a deep breath while holding it and walked over, trying to see this horrible child again. Looking down at her feet, she was shocked that the girl had a scalpel in her hand and her upper wrists were cut 8 times. Oh my god! Shigo said, holding her stomach about to throw up. What's wrong with you? Shigo managed to ask as she walked in front of the little girl and kneeled down. Stop crying, she said in total fear. Why am I being so brave? Shigo then wondered and slightly smiled. Lifting the head up on the girl, with blonde hair looked in Shigo's crystal green eyes. "What is wrong with you?" Shigo asked. "My hand hurts," the young child responded, then looking at her wrist. "Well, you cut it." "He wants you, Shigo," the young girl said. Then Shigo heard the words, "He wants you." Her face went to moon white. "Who wants me?" she asked in suspicion. "The one from hell. The one from the pits of hell that is brought back. He will be in disguise this time. The person you least expect." "Who will be in disguise?" Shigo asked, a bit hurried but worried voice. Then the little girl's body started to shake as she let go of the legs and flew onto the ground. Screaming with intense pain, the blonde girl was having a seizure. "Oh my God!" Shigo yelled in horror as she reached to the girl's side and tried to hold her in her arms. "Stop!" Shigo yelled at the top of her lungs. And then with a swirling sensation was going around Shigo, throwing her head up and looking up into the air, she saw a face, a man with black hair and hazel eyes. He was crying, and his face was cut into 1,000,000 pieces. Opening his eyes, he starts to laugh as they locked onto Shigo, and she knew exactly who it was. "You go back to hell and stay there where you belong," Shigo roared, as the young girl's body started to drift away. "Never!" the voice roared. "No!" Shigo yelled in pain, as her world was coming back down to normal, falling and falling, and then she landed on her stomach on the hard, cold floor. The air smelled old, and she wasn't sure where she was until she looked around, putting one hand on her head and started to cough because of the dust. "Where am I?" Shigo thought as she looked around. "No, it can't be." Getting up and realizing she was in Draken's old lab in their old lair. "Help me," said a voice that was coming from behind the desk. Shigo quickly spun around in her fighting position, only to see Draken tied against a wall. "Draken?" she yelled in shock, running over to him. "Shigo," he moaned, waking up at his wife. "Oh my God, Draken, what happened to you?" she asked, untying his wrists and untying the rope around his feet. Falling helplessly in her arms, and she knelt down and looked at him at the same way he did when he was dying in Dementor's lair. "Shigo, I can't go on," Draken said with his eyes locked in hers. What are you talking about?" Shigo said, running her fingers down to the side of the pale and sad face. "He came back. You aren't safe. I have to die. My body won't work anymore," Draken said as tears welled up in his eyes. "No!" Shigo said, arguing with him, as she felt like crying. "I let you die once, and I won't let you die again. I love you," she whispered, burying her head in his chest. "I won't leave you, Draken. Never I will leave you." Spitting up some blood, Draken told Shigo that he had to leave, and not to bring the child with the black and blue flame tattoo in her life. She is what?" she yelled, and she looked at Draken one more time, and then knew he was dead. "No!" she wailed more as tears streamed down her face. "You never did learn, did you, Shigo?" said a voice that she hadn't heard in such a long time. Spinning around, she almost threw up when she saw who was standing a few feet away from her. "Dennis Dementor!" she screamed. "You killed him again!" Shigo roared with anger and protest. "Never seems to learn, does he?" Dementor said, still laughing. His face was bloody, and let's just say it can't get any bloodier. Scars and gashes are whipped all across his small body. Black hair that he had was ruffled, and he still had the mark on his neck. It was black and blue flame. Shigo gasped when she saw it. "You came from hell, didn't you? Didn't you?" she said, now screaming. "Why won't you leave us alone?" Shigo roared. Her voice was swollen and was getting very sore each time she spoke a word. "I will never stop hunting you and Draken for as long as my body is whole," he roared. And with that, Professor Dementor, who came back from the pits of hell, stood before Shigo with a big black gun. "Any last words, you piece of crap?" he asked, mocking her. "Go to hell and make Satan hold you down for the rest of your life." Shigo then responded, grinding through her teeth, knowing he was going to fire. "I don't think he heard you, dear. Maybe if you go see him, you could tell him." Dementor then yelled and fired the trigger. Spinning through the air, Shigo spotted the bullet. This was it. Her life was over. It would hit her head and she would die. God, she missed Draken, but hopefully if she did die, she died trying to save him. and hopefully they would be in a better place. Coming closer and closer, the bullet finally reached her, until it was her body covered in cold sweat when she flew out of her bed screaming at the top of her lungs. It was just a nightmare. Shigo! Draken called out her name as he jumped out of bed in such surprise in the air. His arms were standing straight up. "Oh my god, Shigo, are you okay?" Draken exclaimed as he climbed back into bed and put his arm around Shigo, who looked like she had seen a ghost. I must have had a nightmare." "It's alright, I'm here. No one is going to hurt you," he said, cooing her and wiping her padded bangs out of her eyes. "Gosh, you almost gave me a heart attack. I thought you were being attacked," he said, almost looking at his shivering wife. Shigo's teeth were chattered, and she rubbed her eyes, trying to make herself a little warmer. The window, why isn't it open?" Shigo almost yelled, pulling away from his grasp and running over and locking it shut. "Shigo, dear, you look mad. I think you already had a bad dream. Everything is going to be okay. Just come back to bed and try to get some sleep. It's 2 a.m, Draken said while yawning and blinking a bit at her. "What did you dream about?" Draken asked, getting under the covers and waiting for her to get in the bed. "Someone was after us," Shigo said, slouching back over in the bed. "Who?" Draken asked. "Professor Dementor." "Professor Dementor?" Draken literally screamed, sitting up in bed. "Be quiet, you'll wake your mother," Shigo said, hushing him. "Why did you dream about him?" Draken asked in a worried tone, not even listening to a word he was saying. "I don't know. It was weird. It started off that I woke up from my nightmare and a voice led me down to the stairs. The fire was burning and a little girl was sitting in a pool of blood. Gross, I know, but she had secure and I tried to help her. But when I was back in the lab..." "This lab?" Draken asked, interrupting her. "No," Shigo said, annoyed. "The one in the lair before this one." "Oh, continue," Draken said. "Next thing I knew is you were tied up against the wall and you were dying and I came over and you died in my arms. And then Dementor told me he was gonna come back from the pits of hell. And then he put a gun to my head," Shigo said as tears welled up in her eyes. "Oh no, Shigo, everything's gonna be okay," Draken said as he laid next to him in the dark and looked into his eyes as best she could. "The dream felt so real," he explained. "How now?" Shigo's voice was starting to whisper. "It was all going too real to the point I was holding you. While I was holding you, your real body. You felt my body in my arms? Your arms?" Draken asked, feeling that this wasn't a dream at all. Shigo then yawned and nodded her head and rolled onto her side. Draken lying behind her, wrapping his arms around her, and closed his eyes too. The next morning, Abby came downstairs wearing a nice gray top and gray pants. "Good morning, everyone," she said, as she entered the kitchen and poured herself some tea. "Here, Mom, let me get you that," Draken said, helping her with tea so it wouldn't spill all over her. Reading the paper, as Draken always did, he told xXXKimPossible once again saved the world. "Do you miss it?" Draken asked Shigo, as she did dished as he came in and held her from behind. "Do I miss what?" Shigo said in a romantic voice, as Draken pulled her hair back slightly and kissed her neck, making her moan a bit. "Being villains," he said, with each little soft kiss. "Sometimes," Shigo responded, taking his arms and placing them around her waist. "How do you feel?" Draken then asked her, with compassion and trust. "How do I feel?" Shigo said, turning around to look into his eyes. "The baby, I mean." "Oh, the baby, I feel fine. And I do hope she does too," Shigo said, looking down, noticing her tummy was slightly larger. Draken smiled and put his hand on it, and then looked back up at Shigo. "We need a name," Shigo then said, walking past them and cleaning up the rest of the dishes. "Okay, I've come to the decision. If we have a baby boy, I like the name Freddy. How about you?" "Freddy?" Shigo thought. "I like it," she then said, smiling. "But if we have a baby girl, I do like the name Allison," Draken said, tapping his fingers on the table. "Ooh, I love that name," Shigo said, smiling at him and cleaning off some more food in the dish. "I like the name Roberta," Abby said, taking a sip of her tea, and was going back to the morning paper. "Mother, we're not naming our child Roberta," he said, laughing a bit and sitting down. "So what's the agenda for today?" Draken asked. "I don't know. It's Migo's birthday coming up, so he insisted I get him a card," Shigo said in the normal sarcastic tone, rolling her eyes. "Come on, Shigo. You know you love your brother. You might just have to admit it," Draken said, teasing her, and eating a donut. "Never," Shigo said, joking, and turning around again. The day was nice and calm. The sun was out and shining, and Draken decided to take out the Commodore Puddles for a walk, which was rare. "Puddles!" Draken yelled, looking around from the house for the energetic pink poodle. "Shigo, have you seen the dog?" "No, but he probably took himself out since you never take him out," Shigo said, looking up from filing her nails. "Very funny," Draken responded, as he went downstairs to his lab. "Commodore Puddles, are you in there?" he asked, as he flicked on the lights. Looking around at his very messy room, he spotted something pink and fluffy from behind the bookcase. "Too late, I found you," Draken said, laughing to himself, as he walked over and pulled the struggling dog free. Licking his face, the dog then flew from his arms and raced out of the room. Leaving the room, Draken noticed that the Commodore Puddles had left his collar behind it, and it was a big bookcase that was coming from behind the wall. Walking over and kneeling down, something caught his eye. Next to his little red collar was a hole in the wall. "Oh great, we probably have mice," Draken thought, as he got up to a flashlight. The hole was rather large, and the inside, you would find something he would at least expect. Flipping the flashlight on, he took a little look in the little hole. Draken and Shigo never really knew the history behind this lair. They only just knew it was another villain used it for his or her evil work, and trying to take over the world. When they bought the lair, their house owner never told them that it was more than one story, but he knew what it was, nor did care. "This hole looks old," Draken muttered to himself as he studied it. Peering through the small hole, the only Commodore Puddles could get through, he didn't see much. Maybe this should get boarded up soon. Wait a second. What is this? Draken thought to himself as he reached his hand and pulled out a long brown dusty tool. "What's this?" Draken said, studying the scroll very carefully, not wanting to rip it. Unraveling, his eyes grew very wide as he scanned the piece of parchment in total shock. Across the top of the scroll head, Akita for Domad. "What does that mean?" Draken whispered to himself out loud as he looked at the parchment. It had many different signs and writings on it, the kind that Draken never seen before. Rolling it back up, he took a deep breath. Something inside of him was telling him that he shouldn't tell Shigo about his writings, and then felt something else forcing him to go up and show her everything. Maybe I should put it away for now. Draken then finally walked over to his desk and put it in the drawer. Walking out of his lab and locking the door, he went down to find the Commodore Puddles. "Hope you two have a nice walk," Shigo said, as Draken walked through the living room, not saying a word and slamming the door. Shigo looked up and then rolled her eyes. Men. Commodore Puddles and Draken's walk was very peaceful. "Ah, isn't this such a nice play, Puddles?" Draken said, looking down at the pink fluff ball that was scurrying along the side of the street. Draken smiled and kept up his pace to stay with the little pooch. Shigo, on the other hand, had found Miss Lipsky in her room and was looking through some old photos that she carried around. Shigo saw that the door was cracked and felt that the old woman was lonely. So feeling happy mood for once, Shigo knocked on the door slightly. "Come in," Miss Lipsky said, as Shigo pushed open the door, twisting her fingers because she was nervous. It was so scary. Draken was a complete duplicate to his mother and his father, but at his age he had more of the same genes from his mother now from when he was a child. "I was wondering if you needed anything," Shigo said politely. "Oh, no dear, I'm fine, thank you," she said, smiling. "What you looking at?" Shigo asked, walking towards the ripped pictures that Abigail held in her hands. "Oh, just some old photos of Drew when he was younger," Abby said as Shigo sat down next to her. Taking the first picture that Abby let her see, Shigo laughed and smiled at the picture. The picture she first saw was a picture of Draken when he was a baby. He had a little bit of black hair, but didn't have teeth yet. He was giggling and looking up at the camera and waving his feet in the air. "He was such a cute baby boy," Abby said, smiling and looking at the baby picture. "I could tell," Shigo said dreamily. The next picture that Shigo saw was when Draken was going to his first day of preschool. "Why does he look so sad?" Shigo asked, flipping her hair behind her ears. "Oh," Abby laughed. "He didn't want to leave me and the horses, but I told him it was only for a few hours and that he'd be home soon. But he never listened," Abby said, laughing, as Shigo did the same. On Draken's first day of preschool, Draken was wearing a black top with a skull in front and dark blue pants. Looking through the more pictures that Abby had held in the wallet, Shigo then realized how nice she was. Shigo then realized that Dr. Draken didn't get his short temperament and his anger from Abby at all. He must have got it from his mysterious father that he never spoke about. Draken, on the other hand, was daydreaming as he walked Commodore Puddles, who was sniffing at everything he saw in sight. When he was a little boy, he remembered getting very sick and having a bad dream that came true. Little Drew stood up in front of the long dark alleyway. It looked like New York City, but at midnight. Looking around but standing still, he saw a sign above him that read, "The Sorcerer's Pub." Walking to a door, it was the entrance. He walked in slowly. Inside the pub, it was dark, and the air was filled with smoke. Drew coughed a bit from the smoke because he did not use his taste in his mouth, but he ignored it. No one in the dark, frightening pub seemed to have noticed a small boy was walking around curiously. Drew then suddenly slipped on some beer that was splashed around by a large, drunk Irishman. Falling flat on his face, his black glasses flew across the floor and were almost stepped on. Luckily, Drew got them before they were crushed by one of the waitresses. "What were you keep your drink?" Drew asked, annoyed, as he narrowed his eyebrows to the big man, who just looked at Drew and laughed. "Aye, and what is that little lad like you doing about it?" he asked, burping. "Gross!" Drew then thought to himself, rolled his eyes at the man, and then just looked around some more. Taking in every face that he saw in this dirty pub, he looked around once more. On the wall there were long, touching ground Irish and American flags. To the back of the pub was a stage with lots of lights. A few showgirls were dancing on it, and some drunken men were cheering them on and throwing roses at them along with coins. "Why am I here?" Drew wondered to himself as he looked a little more. "Dad?" Drew then said out loud in a state of shock. Sitting a few tables away, Drew, who was standing next, sat his father, Greg Lipsky. Greg didn't look well at all, and was just sitting like some other men that Drew had never recognized. Greg's black hair seemed all messed up, and dark circles underneath his eyes. "So, Greg, you got the loot or not?" a short, slender man said, who was sitting across from him. He had brown eyes and red and black hair on top of his head. The man mouthed like he was getting involved in the mafia or involved with some gangsters. Greg looked at the man as if he was crazy and took a long swig of his bull's beer and wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "Don't give me that look, Gregory," the man growled, as he reached into his pocket and pulled out a picture of another man and slid it across the table to Greg, who was totally drunk. "Yeah," Greg hiccuped. "Who is he?" he then asked, looking tired at the man with the red black hair. "Sean Paris. I'm working for him as well. Apparently he and I didn't get along. In other words, he didn't pay me on time, and look what happened to him," the cruel man said as he pulled another picture and held it up. Greg almost got sick to the floor when he saw the picture. The young man's name was Sean Paris, who was also in the picture. His skull had been bashed, but his body was torn apart. Quickly shuffling the picture back into his pocket, the man with the weird hair looked around cautiously. "Why did you show me that?" Greg asked, turning green. "'Cause that's what happens to him when he doesn't pay me the money he owed me," he growled, standing up fiercely. Greg then throwing his hands back up as he stumbled out of the bar. "Dad?" Drew said, grabbing a hold of his hand, but when they touched Greg's body, right went through Drew's. Looking dumbfounded, Drew didn't care. He turned around and heard the man speak again. "You can't win, Greg. I'll hunt you down and kill you and your skimpy little family," the man roared, now getting the attention from the other people in the bar as well, Some of the girls stopped dancing and watched in fear as Greg kept his back towards the crazy men. "Go to hell," Greg then muttered, and gave him the middle finger. Drew's little eyes went wide in shock to see his father give anyone the middle finger. That was when he heard a click, and Drew spun around to see the crazy man, who was extremely drunk, whipped out a black and silver gun. Drew screamed as everyone else did in the bar as well. "Dad, get down!" Drew roared, covering his hands over his head. "Bye-bye, Greg." The man laughed evilly as he fired. And with that, Greg was dead. "No!" Drew screamed as tears streamed down his face, as everything in the pub was spinning. And with that, Drew woke up in his bed, screaming at the top of his lungs. Draken had shaken his head and came out of the trance that he was in. He didn't realize it, but he was right in the middle of the woods. Running out of the woods and finding his way back home, he decided it was maybe best if he headed home and did some work to see if his mother was all right. "Drew!" Abby yelled as she flew upstairs into his bedroom. "Honey, what is it?" Abby asked in a state of shock. "Mom!" Drew wailed as tears streamed down his face as she walked over and hugged him tightly. I had a horrible nightmare," Drew said, wiping his little nose with his sleeve. "What did you dream about?" Abby asked, checking his forehead to see if his fever broke. Lying back down and resting his head on the pillow, he saw that it was 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. at night, and it was still raining heavily. "I had a dream that Daddy was killed in a pub." "Oh, Drew, why would you ever think that?" Abby asked, holding his hand. I don't know. It just came," Drew said. With that, he told his mom about the nightmare he had. Every little piece he could remember. At the end of his long tale, Abby's face was pale like white ice cream colored concrete on the sidewalk. "Well, Drewy, I'll tell you this. Your dad is all right, and he's downstairs and is watching TV. Don't forget as well, that dream you had, it will never come true," Abby said, smiling at her little boy kindly. "Thanks, Mom," Drew said, and smiling back at her as she leaned back down and kissed his forehead. "Try and get some sleep," Abigail then whispered, and walked out of the door and left it open halfway. Drew then went to school every day and would play with the horses when he got home. One afternoon during school, his life changed. Sitting alone in a black small pail, the teacher tapped on the chalkboard, making a horrid screech noise. "Class, settle down, please. Settle down!" she screamed, as everyone in the class dropped their books or whatever they were carrying and looked at the teacher, who was fixing her skirt. "Thank you," she said in a fake cheery voice. "I have an announcement to make. Starting today, we will have a new girl in class. Let me go and get her." The teacher, named Miss Gallagher, walked out of the room, and the minute that everyone started whispering to each other and laughing quietly. Little Drew looked around and fixed his glasses. "A new girl? Maybe we could be friends," he thought as he tried to fix his own wavy hair as best he could. Some of the girls were whispering and laughing as they looked at little Drew. "Oh, look, little Lipsky boy is trying to impress the new girl," one of them said as the others howled in laughter. Drew narrowed his eyebrows and slouched down on his seat, trying to get away from the humiliation as best he could. 3 minutes later, Miss Gallagher walked back in with the small girl behind her. "Class, I would like you to meet Kylie Paris," she said, stepped out of the way to reveal the new girl. In stepped Kylie. She was Drew's height and was very skinny. She had golden blonde hair and light brown eyes. Her hair was pulled back into a loose pigtails, as she was wearing a mud blue aqua tea colored sweater with a pair of soft tattered jeans. When Drew laid his eyes on Kylie, everything stopped. Her face was shining brightly, and Drew almost fell out of his chair. "She's so beautiful," he thought, and smiled dreamily at her. "Hi, I'm Kylie. It's nice to meet you all," she said, laughing slightly. Drew's eyes finally unlocked them from the girl's sweet face and looked at the other children of the room. Some of the boys were drooling when they saw her, and some girls were smiling, hoping they could make a new friend, and others were wearing scowls thinking show off. "Yes, Kylie. Well, why don't you go put your book bag and hanger over there, and take a seat next to Drew over theirs," Miss Gallagher said, pointing towards Drew and walking over and putting her things on the hanger. "Hey, Miss G, why does the pretty new girl have to sit with the science freak?" One of the boys sneered in front of the middle towards as Miss Gallagher Yeah, he is a freak and she is a queen. She deserves better, another boy said, dreamily drooling and staring at Kylie, who was blushing and smiling from the nice compliments. Alan Christopher Dentor, how dare you treat Drew like that? She said, trying to be a good teacher, but underneath was a fake scowl as she was laughing from the joke Alan made. I'm sorry, Mame, she said, as it felt so faked it sounded like dolls. Miss Gallagher rolled her eyes back into the chalkboard and wrote some things down. Drew was so scared. He had just fallen deeply in love with a new girl, and already people were making compliments that he was a freak and would give Kylie the wrong impression about him. Looking quickly at Kylie when she pulled out a few papers and held them in her arm, flipping through her golden crisp blonde black hair back, Drew's eyes were all soft and warm. Everything was absolutely perfect until Ellen Dentor and his jerk-like gang threw a piece of paper towards him in his head. Drew opened the crumpled-up paper and ignored the snickering boys. Read, Drew and Kylie sitting in the tree, Kissing. First comes love, then comes marriage, then Drew has you-know-what with Kylie, and they have a baby in the baby carriage. That's not all. Before you know it, Drew was giving his baby alcohol. Drew could feel the tears wheeled up in his crystal black eyes. How they could do this to him? How did they not know that he had a crush on the new girl? I'll get those jerks back one day, Drew thought immediately, as he ripped up the pair of glasses and stared at Ellen and the rest. Excuse me, Kylie said, standing in front of Drew's desk. Oh, hi, Drew said, almost in a squeaky voice. Kylie giggled a bit and smiled back up at him. I was wondering if you could lend me a pencil for class, she asked kindly, reaching out for his small peach-colored hand. Drew didn't take his eyes off of hers. Wow, she seems nice. Where are all my pencils? Drew then even thought as he quickly got on his 2 knees and rummaged through the desk to find a pencil. Thanks, Kylie then said after she gave her one and pulled out a chair for her that was next to his desk. Sitting down onto it, feeling like a queen, Kylie blushed and smiled as Drew then pushed her in. Okay, class, we will be talking about the bullying for the next part. And because we are going to talk about this, there has been numerous complaints of some children in here getting beat up terribly, Miss Gallagher said, as Drew looked down and shook his head, remembering the pain and suffering he had gone through a few years ago, when Alan who beat the shit out of him with a black whip or stick. Let's see, who should I call first? Kylie, since you are new, why don't you tell us what you think bullying is? The teacher said, smiling and clapping her hands together, making everyone jump. I think bullying is when a child picks on or hurts another child, and I also think it's wrong, Kylie said, sitting up straight and her hands folded. Excellent, Miss Gallagher responded, making the class jump again. You see, class, Kylie is 100% correct. I would like to see all of you answer the question that way I asked them for you, she said, peering evilly at the innocent children in the scattered rows. The day turned out pretty nice for Drew, except for the mean note that Alan had sent him, but he didn't think of anything of it. Looking how beautiful Kylie was in her ever, he had the moment to himself. She would feel happy and excited and scared at the same time. Kylie did catch his eye once, and she would smile back at him and pull her blonde hair behind her ear and then get back to work. Drew always thought when he was younger that Kylie was the best thing that's ever happened to him, and he was right in some ways and wrong in others. What's up, my pretties? It's the Lion Queen here. I want to appreciate you all for tuning into this video, and I do appreciate you guys supporting my video by giving this video likes and stuff. If you really enjoyed this video, be sure to leave a like, comment and subscribe if you're new, ring the bell for notifications to when I upload so that way you guys will get updated for whenever I upload. If you want to follow me on Twitter or DeviantArt, feel free to leave a follow on those if you are interested in following me on those socials. If you want to support my backup channel, known as Miss Dark Shigo, feel free to subscribe to it, as a link to that will also be in the About page section. And with that being said, and that being the case, thank you so much for watching, my pretties, and as always, Stay pretty.